Listen up, cause I'm gonna tell you a story. It's the best story of them all, with blood and lots of fighting, and huge lads with fists like boulders and heads as tough as rocks. So, listen hard, or I'll cuff you harder.
The campfires roared and smoked as the orcs huddled around the flames. In the darkness, the light flickered around the rough corral of buggies and trucks. Under the stars, grim-faced orcs roasted a supper of desert squig and sandworm. The food was good, the day's fighting better, but the booty was the best of the lot. On a rock sat Bad Makz, telling his lads the story. The best story of them all. The story of Gorker Morker.
In the beginning, we was on a trip. A long trip to the Warg. The Warg, that's where the best fighting is. That's where the biggest and best orcs go. And there was us, the biggest and bravest of the lot. Us, just think of it. We was driving across the big starry sky in a gigantic buggy called the Oak. The Oak was made of metal and was so big that hundreds of lads could ride inside. Hundreds of hundreds.
The orcs shouted in well-rehearsed unison.
To the Warg! To the Warg!
They liked this story. Bad Max's words conjured a familiar picture of a massive space hulk racing through the darkness of space, carrying the orcs to new battles and fresh conquests.
Yeah, we was going to the Warg. Then, all of a sudden, boom! The Oak, it crashes into this planet. Bang, smack, crunch! The Oak hits the big rocks and smashes into pieces. It smashes up just like them buggies in that fight today. Remember, lads? Remember how that Nagrot's buggy flies into the air and comes down, crump, right on top of his mate's bike. That little buggy skids for ages and gouges out that big trench in the sand.
The orcs laughed. The buggy had seemed to hang in the mid-air for a second, as Nagrot flailed uselessly at the wheel. The biker tried to get away, but only managed to turn his bike half round, before the whole lot came crashing down on top of him. The buggy's wheels sprang off, but its speed carried it through the sand, carving out a great rut behind it. What a great victory.
When the Oak crashed down, it skidded just like Nagrot's little buggy. But the Oak is big. So big it's enormous, and that's bigger than big as every fool knows. The Oak skidded for miles, with bits falling off, and explosions, and rocks, and metal flying everywhere. It was the biggest crash ever, and that's why we calls it the Big Crash. Where the Oak skids, it gouges out this long rut in the desert for miles and miles. Now, that's the big canyon, what we call the Skid.
The orcs listened to the story. That's where it all began, in the Big Crash. That's where the skid came from, its sheer sides hundreds of feet high, its floor the bedrock of the planet itself. The skid runs for thousands of miles across the sand like a giant scar on the face of the planet.
The Oak was wrecked so bad it all turned into junk, and that's where all the junk in the whole world comes from. Just think of all that junk in that big junkyard at Mechtown, where all that junk buried in the desert comes from, and in the Skid. Think of all that nice junk, what the junky mech boys has got, and the junk the Grots has nicked and sold to them runty diggers. All that junk was once the Oak, so imagine how big it must have been. Enormous it was, like I tells you.
Enormous. The broken space hulk scattered over a continent. When it struck the planet's surface, it left a cloud of debris so thick that the sun vanished from the sky for many years. Radiation from the hulk spilled over the desert, killing what little life it may once have supported. But what it did not kill, it corrupted and mutated. The wreckage was everywhere. But even in the midst of the destruction, something crawled from the wreckage. Something green.
What about us orcs then? Was we all burned up and torn into bits in the crash? Was we all smashed to little bits like the weedy diggers and grots? Nah, course we wasn't. Was we, lads?
The orcs chanted as Bad Makz laughed.
No, no, no. Green is good, green is go. Green is good, and green is go.
The shout echoed across the desert, and was joined by the distant howl of some nameless, wild beast.
Of course, some of us were burnt up and busted into big crash. Stands to reason, doesn't it? Maybe it was hundreds of hundreds what died. I don't know, and I doubt anyone else does. Even them smart mech boys in Mechtown what makes us the damn shooters and the clever stuff. Fact is, some of us lads must have made it 'cause we're here now. And some of them grots must have done it too. Though it beats me how them runty gits could have made it when so many of us were burnt up, dead and mangled and all.
Bad Makz scowled as he spoke. A tiny grot caught his eye and scampered away from the fireside where it had hoped to warm itself. It was lucky not to be eaten. Later on, when the sandworms ran out, it probably would be. That's how things were with orcs. Where there were orcs, there were grots. Where there were grots, there were squigs, and other small creatures and fungus. The fungus was everywhere. Throughout the galaxy, wherever orcs lived, planets were gradually orcified, or orciformed. Creatures and fungus appeared as if from nowhere to prey upon, and eventually supplant native life forms. In the end, there would only be orcs and their kind.
When the lads crawled from the wreckage of the oak, they said, "How's we gonna get to the warg now? We stuck here in this flippin' desert, and the warg is stuck without us. So, them mech boys, them clever lads, they says we'll put the oak back together like it was. Us brave lads like you and me, we gets together in our buggies and trucks and bikes and tracks, and we find all the bits, so all the mech boys can make the new oak. The mech boys work and invent and dream up all kinds of smart stuff to make new orcs, so we can all go back to the warg."
The orcs stood as one and screamed at the top of their voices.
"Back to the warg! Back to the warg!"
They screamed up at the sky when they pictured the war going on amongst the glittering stars.
"Back to the war! Back to the war!"
They imagined if they yelled loud enough, the lads in the war might even hear them over the noise of the battle.
So, the mech boys makes the new oak. Using all them bits what lads brings up, it gets bigger and bigger. All around the lads make huts and workshops and that. Then the lads makes the brew huts and slop shops and all the stuff what you needs. And that is how Mechtown was built around the oak. The lads take all the junk they can find to the mech boys, who gives them teeth so they can get more lads together in more trucks with more guns to get more junk. It's a clever plan, and when it's finished, the new oak will take us back to the warg.
The orcs stood on cue and took up the chant once more.
"Back to the war! Back to the war!"
Bad Makz raised his bony arm, and the orcs suddenly fell silent.
The oak gets bigger and bigger and fatter, and one day some smart lad says it looks like the biggest, fattest oak ever. And he's right, or all the lads look at the oak and say so too. And of course, the biggest, fattest orcs of them all is the great big fat orc gods, Gorker Mork.
The orcs sprang to their feet and took up the cry,
"Gorker Mork, Gorker Mork, Gorker Mork, Gorker Mork,"
until the desert was filled by their booming voices, and Bad Makz raised his arms skywards.
The clever mech boys had made a god to carry us back to the warg. Now, some of them clever lads say this god is Mork, and some say the god is Gork. Soon, all the orcs in the world are shouting, "Gork, Gork, Gork," or "Mork, Mork, Mork," and hitting each other and shooting and fighting. Mechtown is burning, and the oak is burning with all them clever lads still inside, still fighting and still shouting, "Gork, Gork, Gork," and "Mork, Mork, Mork," and they is burnt to crisp to bits.
The orcs stirred in the description of the bitter war between the Gorkers and the Morkers. They listened in awe as Bad Makz described how the new Hulk ran with green blood and fires gutted Mechtown. They pictured the orcs grappling amongst the flames as their world fell down around them, and all was cinders and smoke and charred ruins.
Yeah, after the big scrap, all that was left was scrap, and that is why nowadays we calls a big fight a scrap. The new Hulk was wrecked in all the fighting, and lots of mech boys were dead. The mech boys what were left, the Gorkers what shouted for Gork, and the Morkers what shouted for Mork, they start again. Now they says we'll call the new Hulk Gork and Mork just to be on the safe side, cause you can never be too careful with gods. So they calls the new Hulk Gorker Morker.
The orcs leapt into the air, The orcs leapt into the air, yelling and screaming wildly. Half of them shouted Gorker as loud as they could, and the rest roared Morker as orkily as they could manage.
Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker, Gorker, Morker.
At last they all collapsed to the floor, hoarse and exhausted. Bad Makz waited until all was quiet before he resumed the story.
100 years it takes to make Gorker Morker. Hundreds and hundreds, maybe. I dunno, and I don't reckon them mech boys know either. It ain't finished yet, is all, so we keep looking for all them bits until we find some more. And if we find bits, we take some to the mech boys for teeth so we can get more lads, and more buggies, and more guns, and more stuff, and we look out for all them sneaky Gorkers and cunning Morkers, what would fight us and nick bits that we find. And when Gorkers and Morkers find stuff, we get sneaky and cunning and nicks it off them. And if we find enough bits, maybe them mech boys will finish Gorker Morker, and Gorker Morker will say, "What hard and brave lads we are," and scoop us up in his big hands and take us back to the warg in the sky.